So I'd like you, if you could, to use your powers of imagination and imagine a scenario in which a fundamentalist atheist and a fundamentalist Christian might get into a heated argument over one too many drinks. Just use your powers of imagination, believe that such a thing could be possible. Maybe this sounds like what some of you might experience in a few days over a Thanksgiving table with your family and friends. I'm sure none of you have ever seen such a thing. But this particular argument between an ardent atheist and an ardent believer happened in the late 1860s in a tavern in California during the gold rush. It was between a man named George Hull and a Methodist minister. George Hull was a tobacco farmer who, after the Civil War, was on hard times and went out west to strike gold. He was in a tavern one night, drinking too much as he often did, sitting across the table from a local Methodist minister, drinking too much as he often did. And the two of them got into an argument over one particular verse in the Bible, Genesis 6:4. In those days, the Nephilim roamed the earth. English translation, in those days, giants were upon the earth. Well, George Hull thought that was ridiculous. There were no giants. There never had been giants. There never would be giants. The preacher across from him believed the Bible to be literally true, and therefore there were giants, and if it said so, there would be again. The two of them got in this heated, drunken argument that upset George Hull so much that people, he later said, believed such foolish, silly, stupid things and were told by the clergy to believe them, that he went out and perpetrated one of the biggest hoaxes in American history to make those believers look foolish. George Hull was going to bury a giant stone giant in the ground to prove that people would believe anything. So he had a bunch of marble quarried from Canada and brought to the United States on a long journey. He had a secret sculptor hired who worked with a team sworn to secrecy and carved out of this chunk of marble a 10-foot tall giant stone man, a nude figure lying on his side with his head leaning over. They dipped the statue in sulfuric acid and carved away at it to make it look ancient and old. And he found a farmer in New York who was willing to bury the stone giant on his land for a price. This is an expensive endeavor, the modern-day equivalent of about $30,000. And he made the money to do this. He paid for it by selling shares in the future money they would make selling tickets to see the stone giant. So in the dead of night, George Hull and a man named Stub Newell, who owned the farm in New York, dug a hole. And into that hole they placed the 10-foot giant, now known as the Cardiff Giant. They left it there for a year so that anyone who had questions about a big block of marble moving across the country or who had seen them digging in the middle of the night would forget. And one day, Stub Newell hired two men to dig a well on his property, a guy named Henry and a one-handed farmhand named Gideon. He asked them, dig a well right here. So they did. They dug and dug and dug, and finally their shovels hit the hard stone, and they are freaked out. They think they've found possibly a stone giant that they've heard rumors of wandering in the forest. Finally, they uncover it, and news gets around that maybe people have discovered one of those giants of biblical lore in New York State. So they charge their neighbors, as one does, 25 cents, to come and see the stone giant. People come in from miles away, crowds start coming more and more and more, so they have to verify it. They hire a team of local doctors, and they stand with their fingers crossed behind their back, waiting, tense to see what the doctors will say. And this team of doctors in the late 1860s pronounces, yes, indeed, this is a real petrified man, a giant man. They breathe a sigh of relief, raise the price to 50 cents, and charge more and more people to come and see their hoax. They travel around from city to city, fooling the faithful, And George Hull is getting his wish. He gets to use his cynicism to make people of faith look stupid. And he's making a buck and many more off of it. Until they start getting a little skepticism in these towns, and they start getting out of each town a little faster before it catches on. And finally, P.T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey's circus approaches them. Now, it just so turns out that P.T. Barnum is a Universalist, a member of the Universalist Church in America. He comes to them and he says, I will pay you what would be now the equivalent of $1 million to rent the stone giant for 3 months and put it in my museum. So Stub Newell and George Hull think about it. They don't know if they're quite done making money off of all of the rubes in these towns. And they're also worried that if they move the stone giant to Manhattan, people who have seen more of the world might start raising questions. And so they say to P.T. Barnum, thanks, but no thanks. And our Universalist brother apparently believed that all of God's children were able to give him their money. And so P.T. Barnum, 1 week later, after they said no thank you, an exact replica of the stone giant showed up in P.T. Barnum's museum. Nobody knows how, if he had sent spies in the middle of the night to get complete measurements or made a plaster cast, but whatever the case, a week later, an exact replica shows up in the museum. Well, George Hull is furious. I'm supposed to be the person tricking and deceiving people. You can't do this to me. And so he threatens to sue P.T. Barnum, who says, let's do it. Let's bring it before a judge, and let the judge decide which one of these is an actual petrified giant man. George Hull says, you got me. Puts his tail between his legs, makes a little money off of a book deal after he admits that it was a fraud, and loses his money in some bad investments. He ends his life bitter and living in poverty. The man who wanted so desperately to tear down the faithful story of someone else through extreme cynicism, the man who was willing to invest $30,000 and patiently wait an entire year just to say what you believe is valuable isn't true. That man ended up being the victim of the very same cynicism, skepticism, and inability to prove that his giant was real. And I can imagine that drunken preacher with his legs kicked up on a table, quoting scripture at him, "You reap what you sow. Don't you know that if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword?" I tell you the story of George Hull and his Cardiff giant because I think it's representative of the lengths that we will go to rage against the things which don't seem worthy of our trust. There was a point in my life, I've been a fundamentalist Christian, a fundamentalist atheist, and a UU. And during my fundamentalist atheist time, I thought I was going to be the one to tear this whole thing down from the inside. I would find the argument that would prove all of those people wrong. It wasn't a very fulfilling journey. But I know the vehemence that some people, myself included, at times have had when we encounter something that we're told is worthy of trust, but doesn't quite match up. My guess that is on that spectrum, each one of you comes in to this place with your own life experiences that tell you what's actually worthy of your real trust, and what's not. I know that you do, because you tell us in conversations that you thought you were mad at us, but actually you were mad at a pastor you had 35 years ago. I know because a church is like a giant screen for all of people's projections about trust, loyalty, faith, and hope. My guess is that somewhere, somebody or some institution or some reality that you thought would hold you when the bottom fell out failed. A parent, a teacher, a church. It's easy going into the rest of our lives playing out that story of what wasn't worthy of our trust with others. And for me, I was born into an era in our country, at least, our immediate culture, in which our society had already gone through a period of taking institutions that were unquestionable and giving them a big hit. I'm not talking the 50s and 60s here with TV shows that literally said father knows best. I was born in the early 80s, and my first political awareness was post-Watergate. It was Iran-Contra. I watched my president talking about things during the Clinton era that I didn't think presidents had to talk about on TV. I was told that churches, a lot of them were places where children were harmed. Schools were coming under scrutiny. My first lesson about sex was that it was dangerous and might kill you. Most of my friends had divorced parents, including me. And I've entered into some liberal institutions in which people thought it was going to be freeing to tell me, hey, here's another thing you can't trust. That's not why I showed up in this church. It's not why I walked into a Unitarian church for the first time when I was 19 years old. I had already known what wasn't worthy of trust, and I was no longer interested in tearing down somebody else's religious story or taking pride in questioning authority. I wanted to find a reality that was worthy of my trust, and then trust it until proven otherwise. The idea of entering into a relationship that started with skepticism wasn't a life-giving idea for me. My guess is that for a lot of you, you don't come here so that you can hear about the things that aren't true in the world, so that we can take pleasure in being more enlightened than anybody else. My guess is that you come here like I do. You come here people who have lost people who were very important to us, people who struggle with addiction, people who, like Paul said in the early scriptures, don't do what we know we're supposed to do and do what we know we're not supposed to do. My guess is that you show up here alongside of me trying to discover what is truly worthy of a life's faith. And once we start living in a life of loss, addiction, alienation, terrorism, this is no longer some abstract, privileged debate. So what do I trust today? Now, I got emails from more than one church member this week about a video of a little boy and his father in Paris following the attacks. Some of y'all seen this? I got more than one email, and I was thinking about using it in the sermon anyway, and so it convinced me it probably should. So I'd like to show you today a little clip of what I think is a very good example of a child working out in real time questions of what's worthy of real faith and trust.
Tu comprends ce qui s'est passé? Tu comprends pourquoi ces gens ils ont fait ça?
Oui, parce qu'ils sont très 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 méchants. Les méchants, c'est pas très gentil les méchants. Et il faut faire vraiment attention parce qu'il faut changer de maison.
Mais non, t'inquiète pas. On n'a pas besoin de changer de maison. C'est la France, notre maison.
Mais il y a des méchants, papa.
Oui, mais il y a des méchants partout. Il y a des méchants partout.
Ils ont les pistolets, ils peuvent nous tirer dessus parce qu'ils sont très très méchants, papa.
C'est pas grave, ils ont des pistolets, nous on a des fleurs.
Bah les fleurs, ça fait rien, c'est pour.
Si regarde, tu vois, tout le monde pose des fleurs.
Oui.
C'est pour combattre les pistolets.
C'est pour protéger.
Voilà.
Et les bougies aussi.
C'est pour ne pas oublier les gens qui sont partis. Hein.
C'est pour nous protéger les fleurs et les bougies.
Oui.
Ça va mieux du coup?
Oui, ça va mieux.
I have a kid exactly his age, and I can only hope to be such a good dad in response to that. When I was watching, I was thinking, oh, that's a faith conversation. That's a person for whom the bottom has fallen out. And you can watch him in real time. The dad says, no, these flowers will protect us. These candles will protect us. And the kid does what George Hull would have done. No, they won't. He says flowers do nothing. You can hear him trying to articulate. And his dad says, no, they protect us. Is that literally true? Do flowers and candles protect a human body from harm and death and destruction? Probably not. But do they protect the soul of human beings who decide that there is a goodness moving through the world like Frederick Buechner talked about in his reading? I think that's yes. When we talk about being a people of faith here, I think you know pretty well that we're not talking about asking you to believe things that are unreasonable. If you don't get that by now, we're not doing a good job talking, or maybe you're not doing a good job listening. Because that's not what faith is about for us here. Faith, a community of faith in this church, means that we as a community over time develop a reasoned, thoughtful, experience-based, humble encounter to find out what is really worthy of my ultimate trust, devotion, loyalty, and service. Daniel's writing a book on faith right now, and when it comes out, I would encourage you to read it because it has a very good process articulated by which you discover, what do you have faith in? When we had a hymn class here a couple of years ago that our music director, Don Crable, and I led together, he did the music, thankfully, and I did the theology. And I asked the members of the hymn class to engage. They wondered, what do you write a hymn to? How do we write the language for a hymn? And what I said to them is, you should ask yourself, what are you utterly grateful for? And what do you desperately need? What are you utterly grateful for? What do you desperately need? I said, if you were going to personify something, give it arms and legs and have it walk into the room and wrap its arms around you, what would you call out to? Would you say, forgiveness, I need you right now. Please come into the room and be with me. Compassion, move my heart. Love, I'm missing you. I want you in my life. Those are the kind of things, if you would capitalize it, and in the middle of the night wake up and go out into the yard and yell at the top of your lungs that you needed it, that's the kind of thing that's worthy of your faith and trust and devotion. These aren't things that will protect you from bombs and guns, and they will not be things that never let you down. But they are things that, if you engage with them over a lifetime, will make your life more whole. And we have answers here in this church. We use doubt as a tool, but it's not our product. We do have answers we've come to. We say that we ask you in this church to grow in compassion, generosity, and service. I can stand in this pulpit with integrity and promise you that if you give your life over to the transforming power of compassion, generosity, service, profound humility, and active love, your life will be made more healed and whole. Not perfect, but more perfect. That those things can be a reasonable guide. If we're going to be a community of faith, we have to be able to respond to that boy. We must be able to articulate, when the bottom falls out, when I am frightened, I feel like my home is not safe, I feel like I don't have protection or community, what will be worthy of my trust? And all of those things will come under scrutiny. Not the kind of test of faith like Isaac and Abraham. Not a group of doctors peering into the hole to study the stone giant you've built. But anything you say is worthy of the ultimate trust of your life will come under scrutiny. We say in this church all the time that we believe that humans are born good. We are at home in these holy, divine bodies, and we must know what to do with that affirmation of faith after terrorism, after violence. If we say that we believe that forgiveness changes lives, and I do, if we say that we believe it's worthy of our faith then we're going to be called to be forgiven and forgive, not just when it's spilt milk and late appointments, but when human bodies have been harmed and relationships broken and severed, when there is shame and guilt. That is precisely the time when we will be called to see if our faith in forgiveness stands. What are you utterly grateful for? And what do you desperately need? This year at the Thanksgiving table, I plan on lifting up, I hope explicitly, the things that have saved my life, or at least its meaning. As an exercise, I might encourage you to do the same. Not only food, shelter, a warm bed, or a safe home, but the things that you know you can depend on to repair the broken and healing parts of our lives. So here's my list. This year I give thanks for the things that make my life whole, or at least more whole, when parts of me are broken. The things that save my life, or at least save its meaning. I give my thanks and I place my faith in the God of my experience and understanding, a mysterious possibility that holds all life and forms my bones and beats my heart. It is a possibility of goodness and wholeness breaking forth into the world at any moment and wants me to be its instrument. I give thanks and place my faith in that God. I give thanks this year and I place my faith in candles and flowers offered in the names of the dead. Not because they protect human bodies from harm or resurrect them from the grave, but because I have watched them save a boy's soul in front of my eyes. I give thanks for forgiveness and I place my faith in the possibility of redemption, because people in my life, in my family, in this church, have failed in important, vital, life-changing ways. And I have failed in important, vital, and life-changing ways. I have faith in forgiveness because I have watched with my own eyes its power to bring a person back from the dead and remove them from hell on earth. And I place my faith in forgiveness because I've seen the burden and poison that people I know have to carry when they don't believe it matters. I give thanks this year and place my faith in love, and I hope I don't have to convince you that it saves lives. I give thanks and place my faith in you. This community that gathers each week attempting to build the beloved community on earth, knowing very well the gap that will exist. There are more hungry people than we can ever feed, and yet I watch you feed some. I watch you sing and pray at the bedside of the sick and dying. I watch you sing and pray here in the sanctuary, knowing well that no words will ever fully encompass what we mean when we talk about the divine. You graciously and generously listen to our words when I know well that they are never fully enough. And you remind me of the possibility of goodness in the world when I need it most. So I encourage you around the table this year, instead of arguments, perhaps to lift up in praise, real praise, the things that you know have saved lives, have made you whole, what you are utterly grateful for, and what you desperately need. May it be a faith worth living. May it be so. Amen.